You have accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Welcome back, everybody, to episode number 127 of the podcast of OA. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and I am joined by my good friend, Phil Bova. Phil, how you doing?
I'm doing good. School year got off to a running start. I'm sure you know about this all from your end, but things are going full speed where I'm at.
Yeah, same here. Our schools in New York opened up this week, so this has been our busiest time of the year. But I'm glad to be talking some comics, and we've got kind of a special episode. We had the opportunity. DC Comics was kind enough to send us an advanced copy of Green Lanterns number 54, and they arranged a conversation with Dan Jurgens. So we're going to be able to release this episode the day issue number 54 hits the stands, so it'll be time and date with the issue, which is great.
Good. That'll be a good thing. No, that means we can give away spoilers and not feel bad about it.
Right, that's right. You know, and so if people have not read episode or issue number 54, I'd highly recommend you do that before you listen to this episode, because not only are Phil and I going to talk about it, but when I have my conversation with Dan Jurgens, we talk all about issue number 54, and definitely you don't want to have your reading experience spoiled. A couple other neat things, Phil, to talk about. I don't know whether you saw this headline, but apparently they released the episode titles for Supergirl for the next season. And episode number 5 of Supergirl, the title of the episode is Parallax.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't see that.
Yeah, I just saw that on the internet tonight. So I don't know. You know, of course, that brings about, well, what are they doing? Are they doing Hal Jordan? Are they going to do the Bug? Or, you know, what are they going to do? So hard to say, but the writers have said that the focus on this season is fear. So we'll see what happens. Could we see Green Lantern finally on TV? Who knows? Speculation is high, obviously, at this point.
Well, I mean, with all this Green Lantern news coming out, it's like that's all Phantom's got to bite on. You know what I mean? It's like they keep throwing us these bones every once in a while. I mean, the last cameo little part I seen that was really that really drew a lot of ire was Hal Jordan's coat that was hanging up in Arrow. I think that was at one time.
Yeah. When Ollie was in Coast City, and there's a scene where they're in a bar and you see Hal Jordan's coat. And,
well, I mean, why would you do that and not follow up on that? I was very disappointed with that series when they did that.
Yeah, you know, they did a lot of teasing about Hal and stuff, and it's hard to see both Ollie and Barry having shows, and neither one of them having Hal on the show, even if it's without him having the ring.
Right.
It'd be nice to see something, you know.
Yep, I agree.
The other thing is, you know, there's a big rally cry going on the internet over Green Lantern the animated series. I don't know if you saw the live stream last week, but Kevin Smith did this. It must have been at least 2 hours long live stream talking about the DC Universe streaming service, and CBR, Comic Book Resources, for once actually wrote a good article. They wrote an article about the Green Lantern animated series and why it should be revived, which is something all of us Green Lantern fans have been saying for a long time, and a lot of people responded to it.
There's been a petition online for that's been going for a long time now. Been people talking about it. I mean, that was a popular series, and I remember when after it ended or whatnot, people were talking about why it just fell off, and a lot of it I think had to do with the network itself, with that with the Cartoon Network and the whole WB thing.
The big thing was that, and this sounds so preposterous now, but the budget of any of these animated series is built around having a toy line. Right. And the toys for the Green Lantern movie were still sitting on the shelves when they took the prototypes to the toy stores. And the way it works is that, you know, it isn't like a toy company makes the toys and then they find out what the interest is. They shop around the prototypes and the ideas to the retailers, and then the retailers put in their orders for the toys, and then they're built to order. So because the retailers couldn't unload the Green Lantern movie toys, they had zero interest in buying toys for an animated series because they didn't feel that the consumer would distinguish between the two, and so they had no interest in it. So because there was no toy line, there was nothing to help underwrite the cost of the show. And that show, in talking to the producers of the show, it was about $1 million an episode to make.
Yeah, I heard it was pretty high. But I mean, a lot of it has to do with their marketing employees. I mean, their marketing has always been questionable. Even with the bigger films, their marketing's been kind of shady. And I felt like they laxed in that, especially with that series. I mean, they really did it bad with the Green Lantern movie back when it came out.
Yeah, I kind of hope they give it another look. Whether it's CGI or not, I don't know. I'd be fine if they wanted to switch the animation style to save money, as long as they could bring in at least some of the same writers and the voice talent and kind of continue on. I'd love to see it. I know a lot of Green Lantern fans would as well. And the other big thing that happened since the last time we recorded was, we talked with Robert Venditti a couple of episodes ago, and. Sure. After you and I got done with him, he asked me for my address. He wanted to send me something. So since the last episode, since the last time we talked about this, I did get a package from Robert Venditti. And those that are in the Blog of OA Facebook group have already seen the picture of what he sent me. But I'll share it here for those that are not part of that social media platform. And I know, Phil, you're not, so this is news for you. But what Robert sent me was a pen that he signed. He autographed it, and it was the pen he used to write the plots and map out the end of his run.
That's pretty cool, man. That's really nice of him.
Very, very, very classy on his part, and I treasure it. It's really kind of a unique item I have. From some of the artists I have, prints or commission or so. For a writer, it's hard to get something other than their signature. So for him to take the time out of his day, and he sent it on his own dime. He sent it to me, and to be so thoughtful to think that I might find value in the pen that he used to write the plots. And of course, it's a green pen.
Oh, that's a heck of a gift. I mean, it's like that'd be like having the check that Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were given for the rights of Superman back in the 1930s.
Yeah. I was very touched by it, and I wrote him a nice thank you, and he was glad that I appreciated it, and I certainly do. Yeah. I just thought it was a class act.
Yeah, that's really, really nice of him. That's big of him. And that goes a long way. I mean, it shows his talent. I mean, these writers are more in the spotlight now than they've ever been. And I think the fandom is taking more recognition of their works, and a lot of the stuff that they've done. And I've seen like a revamp and like a rejuvenation of the appreciation of both art and writers in the past few years.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we've got a lot to talk about, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk about Green Lanterns number 53 and 54, and then we'll jump into the Dan Jurgens interview, and then we're going to do our retro review, which is going to be on Tales of the Green Lantern Corps number 1 through 3.
Sounds great.
This is Robert Venditti, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
Welcome back to Podcast of OA, episode number 127. And, we've had a couple of Green Lanterns issues to talk about since the last time we talked about the series. Issues number 53 and 54, which are the next two parts of Evil's Might by Dan Jurgens. And, Phil, this is a pretty interesting turn of events as to what Dan Jurgens is doing. What do you think?
Well, the first thing I love about this series is, and plus Dan Jurgens, he brings in Cyborg Superman, which is one of my favorite villains. And I just love seeing him incorporated in any storyline. I loved him in the Sinestro Corps War. I loved him when he pops up every now and then, and I love him in this. And then when I read it, I was like, that seems like something that Dan Jurgens would bring that back, And I just love the character. I love seeing him, and I love seeing Simon Baz being found guilty. I love it.
Yeah, this is all about distrust.
It really is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in this day and age when it only takes one person to cast aspersions against somebody else, and then that gets told over and over again like it's truth, and then somebody finds themselves on the wrong end of a losing battle, whether it be on social media or what have you, I find that this story is very, very time appropriate.
Yeah, it really is, and it's really, really good how they hash it out with the distrust in between them, because not only you got the dynamic of Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz, but then you got the Hal Jordan being thrown in there, and he's talking to Jessica about it. And then you got Guy Gardner on top of it, which, I mean, everybody knows he's about as untrustworthy as they come in the past. So all these inflection points, and they really, really collided really well with Jurgens' writing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting too that Jessica knows Simon better than anybody else, but even she's starting to question it a little bit. And what I liked in issue 54 is where you see Jessica kind of dig her heels in a little bit and stand up for Simon, and Kyle's right there too, because Kyle's saying we really don't have any evidence. We have presumptions on our part, and then you have kind of Guy and Kilowog on the other side saying, well, if we can't talk to the Guardians, how can he be on orders from the Guardians, because they can't talk to him either.
Exactly.
So I think it's really kind of neat how he's pitting them against each other. I think he's doing a good job of keeping all the characters in true form to themselves. They're true to their own character. And then you add Cyborg Superman on top of it. And here, who better to hack the power rings than Cyborg Superman? It makes perfect sense.
The guy's amazing. I've always loved this character. And what was really interesting about Simon Baz, not that I like to dish out all the, I like the guy, don't get me wrong, but this kind of shows the failure of his gung-ho attitude. I mean, he's shown that time and time again, where he's had a gung-ho attitude throughout the whole entire series. But here he did the same thing, and it backfired on him because he got duped. And it shows his rookie status because he didn't think before he acted.
Very, very true. And one of the things I thought was really cool, and I mentioned this in the conversation with Dan Jurgens, is he uses this whole thing about, do we trust technology too much and so on, to reinforce Simon Baz's initial thoughts about why he carried a pistol. And so you see at the end of issue 54, Simon is like, this is exactly why I don't trust these rings. And he grabs a pistol from the Fortress of Solitude and he's ready to go,
I hadn't really considered that point of view, but it's interesting. That makes total sense now. You're right. I mean, and that really brings up the question of failed technology. I mean, you and I deal with it on a given basis. I mean, in our professions, and we know how much it's failed us time and time again. I'm sure you can relate to that. And here it's the same thing. And then how much trust do you put into a machine? I mean, it's kind of like a Terminator extreme,
Right. You've got a couple of different levels here. You've got the distrust of technology, putting too much faith in it, and then taking things at face value, which spend an hour on social media and that's what's out there. One person makes a claim against someone else, whether it's true or false, and everybody dogpiles on it as if it was the written gospel, and so it's interesting to see this whole thing about what's real and what's fake, and when you're being intentionally misled and you fall for it, what are the repercussions? And then again, for Simon, this really completely undercuts any trust and faith he had in his power ring.
Well, not only that, I mean, he's got a lot of distrust that he's built off of to begin with, especially with him being accused of being a terrorist, and that was way back when he was first coming out.
True, very true.
So, I mean, this goes all the way back to that point. And it's interesting you mentioned the gun thing, because there was a lot of debate early on with this character about why is he carrying a gun around? What's the need of him carrying a gun all the time? And then slowly but surely you saw the gun kind of either not disappear, but just not be used or not mentioned or not shown a lot. And then right here at the end of 54, it's just brought right back, and Jurgens brings it right back into the narrative. And that's really cool how he decided to do that. But Jurgens is a great writer. I mean, he did really good with the Superman titles, and I grew up on a lot of those. That was early, when he was writing them and stuff. And a lot of the stories that he told in there, it's just nice to see him come all back, even in this one, especially with Cyborg Superman still around and still making a name for himself.
Yeah, I mean, Dan Jurgens was part of that legendary writing team that wrote the Superman books back in the day when they created Doomsday and they did all those, they killed Superman off. And he's one of those writers he's a craftsman when you get right down to it. And, when we talk about Simon Baz, this is something that we haven't dealt with since issue 17, when Simon and Jessica teamed up with Batman and Batman talked Simon out of carrying the gun.
Okay, that's when it happened. I'm glad you brought that up.
So, it's really kind of neat because this really resonates a little bit about Simon Baz, because so much of this series, they've put a lot of focus lopsidedly on Jessica. And so Simon's kind of gotten the short hand of the stick quite a bit. And this really gives him a chance to have an emotional story for him.
But I wonder if also, while jumping off exactly what you were bringing up about the focus on Baz right now, But I wonder if this is, I mean, because this title is getting ready to end. So I wonder if this is their way of writing forward what's going to happen to these characters. Because we know Jessica is going to go to Justice League Odyssey. So even from this point on, there doesn't have to be a lot of narrative focused on her. Now with Simon Baz and all focus and attention on him, a lot of the narrative is going to be focused on him as a character, Kyle Rayner, because of the Heroes in Crisis coming up, and then what's going to happen with Guy Gardner as well.
Right. Guy Gardner and Kyle. I mean, Guy Gardner is the one person who really doesn't have a place right now. We know that Kyle's at least going to be in Heroes in Crisis for a little bit. And, he may come out of the other end of it. He may not. Everything is still up in the air at this point. And we know John is going to be in Justice League and Jessica's in Justice League Odyssey. And Hal is the main focus of the Grant Morrison run. Where does it leave Guy Gardner? And actually, there's been a lot of people saying, maybe it's time for Guy to get his own book back. And I know Robert Venditti is very interested in a Guy Gardner Arkillo team-up book. He and I have been kind of joking around online. I created this little image of the Odd Couple, the old 70s show of Guy Gardner and Arkillo as the Odd Couple. And this is what I envisioned the series to be with. And he's like, I could be on board with that. So, hard to say what's going to happen. I don't think the Damage book is going to be around too much longer. I don't think it's doing very well. So does that free Robert Venditti up to write another series? And, he loves writing Guy. Who knows?
Yeah, I read the first few issues of Damage. I was always confused by the character because it reminded me of Doomsday a little bit.
Yeah.
But anyway, we don't need to digress into that. Back to the land.
We would start digressing and go off on a couple of tangents. But what did you think about the fact that Dan Jurgens brought back the Phantom Ring of all things?
That's a cool concept, and I really think that can go really, really far with any kind of series. I mean, and it's really cool how Cyborg Superman played that out. Yeah, I liked it. It was really, really neat idea.
To think that he made it invisible and undetectable and put it on Simon's hand when Simon wasn't looking, and then now he's got it. His goal wasn't to get a Green Lantern ring. His goal was to get the Phantom ring because now he can use whatever color he wants. And will Henshaw, with his ability to hack things, will he be able to finally be the one individual in the universe who can control the Phantom ring rather than the Phantom ring being like an overpowered mood ring that reacts to the wearer?
Now, do you remember a point in the series predating this issue where Simon ended up with the Phantom ring on his finger?
No, but in issue 54, he shows that he had smuggled the Phantom ring out and made it invisible, and when Simon showed up to Kata Sal's body, he slid it on Simon's finger without Simon knowing about it.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I didn't remember the Phantom ring ending up on Mogo at all. I thought it disappeared. I don't remember what happened to the Phantom ring. I have to go back and look at it.
Yeah, that's what I was confused about myself.
But whatever rate, he's got a reason to say that it was on Mogo, and maybe something happened off panel. So I'm okay with that. But I thought these two issues were really strong. It's interesting that in reading some of the conversation online, people are kind of split. A lot of the people who liked the book when it was just a Simon Jessica book have been kind of turned off by it, not by Jurgens, but by the fact that it's an all team book now. And then there are other people like myself who feel that the book is stronger by adding the other cast to it.
Yeah, I would think this added some weight to it. I mean, it's kind of like you're pivoting off of Venditti's run, and then you had Zod, which was a really, really strong character. And then you go into yet another really kind of a strong character around that same kind of timeline with the Superman novels, Cyborg Superman. And he makes him even stronger in this. Like every time Cyborg Superman comes back, he seems like he gets more formidable and he adapts more. And Jurgens' writing of him with this issue really, really showed that. And I think that was a good pivot off of what you mentioned, all the characters lumping on this book so they can finish out what their run's going to be.
Well, and I think it's a logical choice, too, because Cyborg Superman has the history with the Green Lantern Corps. I mean, his story during the Sinestro Corps War, I thought was so powerful. This was a character that he wants non-existence.
It was sad. It was sad. I remember that one image in that panel where just a piece of his helmet or his face was floating through space, and he said "thank you" or something like that.
Right,
and he
right.
just disappeared, and I was like, you know what? That's all that man wanted. And he got what he needed, and then he comes back, and it's like, oh gosh.
Yeah, he's such a tormented soul, and I think that's what makes it kind of a neat character. And you wonder what his end game is. Is this purely revenge, or is this, as they say, suicide by cop? It's suicide by Green Lantern Corps. I don't know.
I don't know either. But I like how they brought back his old uniform and that towards the end of the book. That's the uniform he wore during the Sinestro Corps War.
Yeah, I thought that was great.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It's really, really cool to see him back, and I really hope he plays this out with this series for a while. Because I'd like to see him end up in a book in the future at some point.
Yeah, I think he's a character that has so much potential. So let's take a break and let's jump into the interview I had with Dan Jurgens, because we're going to talk about Cyborg Superman when I had the conversation with him and talking about what's his goal as a writer for the series, because it isn't just to write his own story, it's to position the characters for what's to come. So. Okay. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back to that interview, and then we'll be back after that.
Okay.
What up, dweebs? This is Guy Gardner. You're listening to the podcast of OA.
Welcome back to the podcast of OA. Our next guest has had a long and distinguished career at DC Comics, having written such notable stories as The Death of Superman. He's probably written every character in the DC Comics stable when you come to think about it, but now he is shepherding the Green Lantern series into its final arc. Today is the release day for Green Lanterns number 54, so here to talk to us about it is writer Dan Jurgens. Dan, it is my honor and privilege to welcome you to the show. Welcome to the podcast of OA, and thank you for giving us some of your time.
My pleasure, Myron. It's great to be here.
So, how did you end up getting the writing duties on Green Lanterns?
Okay, so to go back a ways, Brian Cunningham, who is the editor on the book, gave me a call, and he explained that they were, kind of going to be repositioning the franchise a little bit, and that Grant Morrison was going to be coming on to take on Hal Jordan. And he asked me if I'd like to write kind of a closing arc for the Green Lantern series. And I actually said no, because at that time I thought, well, I don't know what I'd want to do. I don't know that I have anything to say as part of the story, that kind of thing. But then as I thought about it a little more, and we had a couple other phone calls, and they kept trying to twist my arm, I kind of came up with a couple of themes I wanted to explore and a couple of ideas that I thought could be a lot of fun. And the next thing I knew, I said yes and just couldn't wait to get started. So that's how we got here where we are on issue 54.
So in issue 54, there's a couple of big things that happen here. And one obviously is freeing Hank Henshaw from his shackles in the Fortress of Solitude. You have quite the storied history with Hank Henshaw and Cyborg Superman.
Right, yeah. And as a matter of fact, of course, all of that goes back to how that would have affected Hal Jordan all the way back when we did The Death of Superman, because that kind of is what, when Coast City got destroyed, that's what set him on the road to becoming Parallax and everything else, and we all know what happened there. So they do have kind of a relationship going back quite a ways.
And Cyborg Superman was huge during the Sinestro Corps War, so he's certainly no stranger to the Green Lantern Corps.
Right, exactly.
So in this issue, one of the things I really liked was that the fact that you pulled some of the plot points out of Sam Humphrey's run. And one of them was Simon Baz's need to, or his psychological need that he felt he had to have a pistol. And you kind of turn everything on its ears here, and you give him justification as to why he did it in the first place. Was that a very conscious decision?
Yeah, very much so. Because I think a couple of things come into this. One is, one of the things we're playing with here a lot in this story is this question of trust and distrust. And I thought one of the things that made Simon so interesting to me is that he carried a weapon. I always liked that. I thought that set him apart from the other Lanterns, and it got into that question of trust. And one of these things is, all of a sudden someone gives you this magic green ring, and they tell you, not only can you step off a building and fly, but you can fly off to other galaxies. My whole thing is that when you take that first step and you're 80 stories up and you step out into nothingness, who really believes that little ring is going to support you, right? And that's what I liked about Simon, is that he questioned that ring. So to be able to play with that in this overall theme of distrust for the rings and distrust for what you're being told, yeah, that was very much built around this idea of who Simon has been.
Yeah, I think this whole story arc, you've done such a great job of talking about distrust and faith, faith in technology and faith in your comrades. I like how you've kind of layered that in. It doesn't take the forefront, but it's really a great piece of subtext on top of having a great action story.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's been a lot of what has been fun to play with here, because we touched on the elements of faith and trust insofar as what Simon and Jess think not only of their rings, but how that affects each other and how they view each other. So that's very much a part of the story.
There's a great scene in this issue where you have Jessica and Kyle kind of trusting Simon despite what the evidence seems to indicate, and you've got Kilowog and Guy and Hal to some degree on the other side of the fence. And I thought it was nice that you kind of threw that in there, because normally we see them kind of all get along, and here clearly there's been some seeds of distrust sown that are paying off for Cyborg Superman.
Right, and I think that is where we really get to address the fact that Simon and Jess, I almost think of them like police officers who are partners in the same police car riding around all the time, and because of that, I think they have a fairly unique relationship. So that allows us to explore that a little bit with all of this.
Absolutely. And then you go back to the trust in the ring and technology itself, which I think is very timely. Trusting technology and putting your faith in technology and taking things at face value, taking it because somebody says so, this must be the truth.
Yeah, and really, obviously there's a little bit of fake news going on here, and it's fun to explore how we can take some of that and put it into a comic series.
I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do with Hank and Hal when they meet up again, because Hal is wearing a much different ring than he was the last time. And, the thing I like to do is between issues is speculate. And I'm thinking, well, geez, Hal's got a ring that's forged from his own willpower. Can Hank hack that ring?
Yeah, that's going to certainly come into play. And I think we've dropped some of the clues as to how and where the effects of that might be. And I think ultimately, while we started out exploring some of these themes of trust and distrust and deceit, ultimately this gets down to a point where it does become a Hank Henshaw, Hal Jordan story.
That's great. Now, the other big surprise in this issue was the return of the Phantom Ring, which, I've been reading comics for about 45 years or so. So it's hard to surprise me, but you surprised me.
Good. I like hearing that.
So what made you think to use the Phantom Ring? Was that just a toy that you thought, well, this is something interesting to try out? Or do you, I don't know, where did that come from? What was your motivation for that?
Well, I've been reading, one of the things you do is, as a writer for DC, I think it's somewhat important to keep up on what's going on in the DC universe and what's happening with all those books. And I remembered, reading the Phantom Ring story here, some time ago, and I just thought, well, that's interesting. And I think that in one of the things we talk about all the time is trying to get some level of cosmic potential into the books. And to me, if you take someone like Hal Jordan and you put him on one side, and then you have Hank Henshaw along with a Phantom Ring on the other side, that can build to something epic. And so I've always tried to hit epic points in my work throughout the years, and to me, this offers just a terrific opportunity to do so.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of storytelling potential with this arc, and I'll be honest, I'm somewhat nervous seeing a showdown coming up between Hank Henshaw and Hal.
Yeah.
So is part of your job in this to write the story you want to write, as well as to kind of position the characters for where Grant's going to pick up?
Yeah, I think so. I think whenever you do something like this, job one is really trying to tell a good, fun, entertaining story. But I think along with that, I always feel an obligation on something like this to those who have been reading the book and were huge fans, especially of Simon and Jessica, that I want to be loyal to those characters and those readers by extension. And at the same time, bring Hal and the rest of the core into it and kind of set up some of the stuff that Grant is going to be going forward with, and just, you're sort of setting the table at that point, and I think we're managing to do a pretty good job of it here.
I think so. I have to tell you, again, reading Green Lantern for a long, long time, I always respect writers who come in and take over and they don't ignore what came before. And to me, that's huge.
Yeah, and I think in a way, what you do is you sort of approach it somewhat like a graphic novel, where you say, okay, I'm not taking on an entire series. I'm not here to do 50 issues that are going to run over, 4 years or something like that. I'm here to do a good Green Lantern core story. And as part of that, we'll focus on, Simon and Jessica and Hal, and get Kyle and Kilowog and Guy into it, things like that. And I really think by doing that, we kind of wrap up some of where Simon and Jess were, and at the same time, set Hal up to go forward.
It's interesting looking back. You have such a big career at DC. I don't think, have you ever really written Green Lanterns before, other than, guest appearances in books that you were working on?
No, and it's really weird because I haven't really written, Green Lantern as a title directly. But the funny thing is, because of the death of Superman and Cyborg Superman and the destruction of Coast City, and then later writing and drawing Zero Hour, where I, ultimately Parallax was the villain there, I've certainly done, I think, some big Green Lantern stories. They just didn't happen in the Green Lantern title.
True. And is it really kind of, I don't know, take me to where it would feel as a creator that, you've created a character like Hank Henshaw, who still exists in the comics, but you're seeing him adapted in the animated movies. With DC, Warner Brothers just released The Death of Superman and then the Reign of Superman animated feature coming out. Is that really satisfying to see a character that you helped shape and create kind of having this longevity? Yeah,
and you certainly add to that the fact that Henshaw was on Supergirl.
Sure.
And I think whenever, especially when you're a writer-artist, you tend to work in a little more solitude than others do sometimes. And to kind of start putting that stuff together, because, way back when I first created Hank Henshaw, there was no Cyborg Superman that was part of this, right? Henshaw was there first as kind of a one-off story. And then to get to this point, I kind of hate to say a couple of decades later, but that's what it is, where the character has life, and it is life that has moved beyond the page to live action and animation both. Yeah, it's a real gratifying feeling.
I was really interested when we started reading your arc that you brought Eon back, which was it was a one-off shot, just like you were mentioning with Hank Henshaw, and the Ravagers, which I thought was really a neat stroke to mine DC history, and rather than just throw something new out there, you use something that existed, and it is a long-time reader. Again, I feel like it makes the cosmic DC universe seem more real, air quote real.
Yeah, and I think, when I've had this discussion with other writers a lot, it's not, in a way, one of the things that made Marvel and DC different is that Marvel would create these things and constantly bring them back and improve them each step of the way until they became major factors. I mean, that's really the history of Hank Henshaw at DC as well. And what we do at DC is, the Ravagers come in, in a story that probably happened around 74, 75, and then we never saw them again. And I think what's important is, instead of constantly creating the new threat, go find something that was there, dress it up, bring it back, improve it, and keep doing that. And pretty soon it becomes something. And what appealed to me about the Ravagers is, if you go back to that original story, Hal Jordan really screwed them over. They had been invited to join this massive federation, and we never did find out a whole lot about what that was, but Hal stopped it from happening. And presumably, from that point on, they ended up living this deprived sort of existence. So they had that sort of personal revenge motive for Hal, and I certainly wanted to get some of that into the book as well.
Well, and it works on both levels, because new readers that don't have that history, it's a new threat to them no matter what you do. But for the long-term readers, they really respect that. And I hope that long-time readers of DC Comics, when they see stuff like this, they really look at that as, boy, this is a creator who really understands DC history and is making it all these puzzle pieces come together in a very logical way.
Oh, awesome. We certainly try.
So we've got, several more issues coming into your run. Can you kind of tease us a little bit about what we can expect to see?
Well, I think kind of what we've gotten to by the end of 54 is, if we take this entire story, it kind of breaks down into 3 acts. And the first act really was the mystery of everything that's going on. The second act kind of starts to reveal who it was and gets us to the point where we reveal it to really have been Hank Henshaw behind everything here. And by the time we get to the end of 54, he puts on the outfit and costume that he wore when he fought the Green Lanterns a few years back. And now, obviously, Act 3 is going to be this epic battle. It is Hank Henshaw, Eon, and the Ravagers versus the Green Lantern Corps. And as part of that, we end up taking this battle, I think, down a very personal road for Hal and Henshaw both. And that's really what the story, kind of is all built on, and what we get to at the end. And I think it's going to be pretty satisfying for people.
Well, I can tell you, as a longtime reader, and I know I have lots of listeners who feel the same way, we're very much looking to see where this story takes us.
Oh, great. I'm happy to hear that. We've been so lucky, by the way, to have both Marco Santucci and Mike Perkins as artists on this. They've just done this sensational job. Mike and I have wanted to work together for years, and it's been so much fun to have him come over to DC and become part of this Green Lanterns effort. And the stuff he's doing, because the way this broke down, Mike did the first 2 issues, then Marco did the next 3, and then, Mike finishes it up at the end, and it's just looking fantastic. So I think people have quite a treat coming up.
I agree. Now, I just wanted to thank you for taking time out of your day, and thanks for being on the show. We really do appreciate it.
Happy to do it, Myron.
Hey guys, welcome back. Myron, here we are, talking again about retro issues, and this time you decided to go back to the Tales of the Green Lantern Corps, issues number 1, 2, and 3, and that was released in May 1981. And it looks like the writers are Mike Barr and Len Wein, classic Len Wein.
Absolutely, and the iconic Joe Staton on art.
Yeah.
I was, it's funny because a couple episodes ago, we were talking about Aricia, and one of the listeners reminded us that Aricia debuted in Tales of the Green Lantern Corps #1, and I hadn't reread that 3-issue miniseries in a long time, and so it prompted me to go back and reread it. And it's been collected. There's a series of 3 Tales of the Green Lantern Corps trade paperbacks, and most of these 3 issues, these 3 trade paperbacks, are the backup stories that used to be in Green Lantern that focused on different individual characters. But to kick it all off, there was this 3-part event that they did, and this is kind of, people talk about the big events with Green Lanterns. This was really the first big event book that had its own title that was about the Green Lantern Corps. And this was not only the debut of Aricia, but it was also Necron. This was the Green Lantern Corps versus Necron and Krona at the same time.
Yeah, classic. Necron. Everybody should remember Necron from the Blackest Night series.
Right. This is, I would almost call this one maybe the Blackest Dusk.
That's a good way to put it.
Because
speaking of which, while we're on this Tales of the Green Lantern Corps, sure. I did go and order off of not off of eBay, but my local comic book store, the Tales of the Green Lantern Corps annual. I think it's #1, and that's the first issue of Sodom Yacht.
Ah.
Yeah, I had some responders on my Twitter who was telling me what happened to him and stuff, and a couple of them pointed me in the good directions, and I actually figured it out. And I was like, okay, I want to get the issue that he first came on in. So I ordered it. It was only about $9, but go local comic book store.
There you go. Well, this 3-issue series also was the debut of the Honor Guard, and Tomar-Re is on the Honor Guard because this is when Tomar-Re is still alive. It's pre-Crisis. And it's really kind of neat because for people who weren't too familiar with all the Green Lantern Corps, if you weren't a diehard fan, this first issue in particular really kind of gave you the who's who of the Green Lantern Corps. I mean, you see Charlie Vicker, and you see Zax, and you see Kat Matui and Arcus Chamac, and all of these characters that have been, even Stal in his original version of Stal is in this miniseries.
Don't forget about Med Phil.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Medphil. Yeah, you can't forget Medphil. And this was like the first time that all 3,600 Green Lanterns had been summoned to Oa at the same time. So it was kind of a big thing. And if you watch the animated film Green Lantern Emerald Knights, which is kind of that anthology, this reminds me a bit of that because it's the whole Krona plot where the giant Krona invades our universe and so on. This directly comes from that. And Krona has basically been souped up in powers by Necron because when they tried to kill Krona last time, Krona's an immortal. And so the whole thing that Mike Barr and Len Wein decided to do is say, well, you can't kill an immortal, so what happens when that air quote happens? And so they said, well, what it did is it awoke Necron up, and Necron wants to get back into the land of the living because, just like in Blackest Night, he wants to bring darkness to the universe. And it was really a really cool, epic 3-part story. And and Necron is not. I have to warn people, if you go back and read this, Necron does not look like he looks like in Blackest Night at all.
Definitely. This a different type of Necron.
Yeah, this Necron kind of looks like Dead Man.
Yeah, that's about what he resembles.
Yeah, a giant version of Dead Man, but maybe a little bit more skeletal than Dead Man. But it's a neat story because what happens is that Hal ends up going into Necron's domain. And, well, I don't want to give away what happens, but something really cool happens when he gets to Necron's domain and how they turn the tide against Necron. But just a neat story, and it even had Tom Kalmaku and Carol Ferris thinking that Hal is dead, and it's just a very epic cosmic tale. And to me, the reason why I really liked this story and why I enjoyed it so much then was it showed the science fiction spine to this mythology, and it also showed how these characters, even though they all have a power ring, are all different, which is something that Jeff Johns strived to do in his run. And this was really kind of the first time back then in the 80s when writers tried to do the same thing. And, you can't go wrong with the classic Joe Staton art. It's just a great story. I mean, it holds up even today. It has maybe a little bit of the Bronze Age goofiness here and there. But I thought it was just a very strong thing. And you can see the seeds of Blackest Night and some of the things that Jeff Johns did in the story.
And you can see a lot of, if anybody's read a lot of Len Wein stuff, you can see a lot of his talent behind this. I mean, he can write. The guy can write really, really well. And he was big in the 80s in a lot of these books, the Here and Marvel, too.
Yeah. And Mike Barr for a while wrote Green Lantern. He had a good Green Lantern run, and he was one of those guys. He wrote the Star Trek books there for a while, and he's got a very keen eye for science fiction. And this was them trying to bring more sci-fi to Green Lantern versus fighting the villain of the week, or how many ways can we play off of yellow villains, that kind of thing. And
while we're talking about this real quick. I like the art, and I like the title, like the Green Lantern Corps, Tales of the Green Lantern Corps. I like the emblem, and I like what it represents. Reflectively, what do you think about the new one, real quick?
The new logo, I like it. It's taken me a little bit to get used to. It's a little different than what I would have expected, okay. but I like it. I thought Morrison would have went more retro, but. I mean, it kind of looks retro a little bit, but I thought he would have went more of the classical style retro. Yeah, I was kind of hoping to have some of the green flames on the top.
Yeah.
But it's okay. I like it. I think it'll grow on me over time.
Sure. Okay.
That's for certain. But this even has a slight retelling of Hal's origin. It has a slight origin of Krona, so it gives you the history of the Corps and the Guardians. It even shows Rory Dagg, who was the first Green Lantern, before they kind of rewrote history.
I think also had Alan Scott in there at one point.
Yeah,
too.
Alan Scott's in here as well, and they did this really cool thing that I'm not sure whether Joe Staton gets the credit for this or whether it's Len Wein and Mike Barr, but they came up with this whole infinity logo thing that when Green Lanterns greet each other, they would create this green energy construct infinity symbol in front of each other that was kind of the core unofficial greeting, which I thought was kind of neat.
Huh, yeah, I didn't really pick up on that until you mentioned it, but yeah, you're right. That's really cool.
And it's just a good all around story. Like I said, it gives you a lot of the mythology. a lot of epic cosmic battles. And it's interesting when they give you the history of the Corps. There's one thing I forgot about until I reread this, because they show the Manhunters and then they show Rory Dagg and the Green Lanterns that follow. But there's another character that's in this purple and black outfit carrying a green pistol and a Green Lantern. And I don't think they ever followed up on what that was. And I remember at the time going, geez, what's that? That's a whole missing chapter of the history of the Corps. But, you know,
You don't know who it was? Did you figure out who it was?
No, I never was able to figure out what it was.
Well, we need to put that out there for our readers, and maybe they can search for us, huh?
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I could never find it, and I don't recall ever seeing it anywhere through the history of things. And trying to read it online, I couldn't find anything about it either. But yeah, how can you go wrong with Necron and Krona as a tag team?
I was looking at the artwork on the covers and the main cover pages. And I was just looking at how, just the detail what they used to do with these covers back then. Just it's incredible. I just love these classic covers.
These covers were all Brian Boland too, which again, another great classic artist.
Just so good. Issue number 2. That just looks intense.
Yeah, that second issue was called Defeat, and you see all the bodies of the Green Lanterns on the ground, and Hal is there, broken but not beaten, and all the other Green Lanterns are on the ground, and just like you said, great covers. Yeah, they really were, and they were vibrant back then. Well, the '80s was big on colors, so it makes sense why. And it's funny on issue number 3, the cover of that, they're all in that one big bubble. I had a mug. It was a Green Lantern mug, and that had that on the side of it. Oh yeah. It changed colors when you put coffee in it. And unfortunately, my mug broke, but I do remember that image being on there. Yeah, it's a classic image. It's one of the few images of the Corps all together in a small enough image that you could use it. That's just a lot of detail going into that. And this is 1980s standards too, which, man, that's impressive. It's impressive. That third issue, they even make references to John Stewart and Guy Gardner. Oh, that's right, they did. This was when Guy Gardner was still in a coma. Yeah, you're right. That is interesting. Boy, these 80s ones were chock full of interesting. I always went back and tried to reread some of the stuff when I found the threads in the story arcs that were going on nowadays. But there's so much information. There's so much things to go back through to try to look through. A lot of times you got to find a starting point on the internet and then work your way back from there just to read a story that has a thread, Oh, yeah. It's the search is fun, though. It really is. It does make it worthwhile. You kind of feel like a comic book Indiana Jones. Exactly. But that's my retro review for this episode. So the ball's back in your court for next time around. Ball's in mine. Okay, so let's see. You went into the 80s. I wonder if I can traverse some of the 90s. I'll let you know. I'll send you a text and let you know, and then we'll give the readers a heads up when we see them back next time. Absolutely. So I hope you guys enjoyed this retro review, and I hope if you guys have not read Tales of the Green Lantern Corps, I hope you seek it out. The trade paperback is a little difficult to find. You might be better off trying to find the individual issues. But if you can find the trade paperback, it's worth it because it does have more of those little mini stories in the back that were backups to the Green Lantern series that gives you a little exposure to all these different characters that existed back then. It was one of the things I loved about the 80s Green Lantern series was, there for a while they had the Adam Strange backup tales, and then they went to the Tales of the Green Lantern Corps, which made so much sense, and it gave you just really neat little one-offs, and that's what led to Green Lantern Corps Quarterly, where they took that out of the book as a backup and made it its own series. Yeah, and it gives you the full breadth of the Lantern Corps, and it's not by... you're not so much fighting for page time back then. They incorporated a lot of this into a lot of these volumes back then, and they wrote a lot about a lot of these characters, and that's where a lot of the characters that you see even cameos nowadays, that's where a lot of their stories come from, is out of these books. Absolutely, and that's what I liked about it so much was that it gave them an opportunity to give a character a focus and tell a story about them and their civilization and their home planets and their sectors. And it gave you enough backstory about them so that when you saw them show up in an issue of Green Lantern, you knew who they were. And I thought it was a neat way to support the Corps without trying to say, okay, here's the guest Green Lantern of the issue that gets shoved into the plot and they're the guy that saves the day. Instead, they gave them a backup story, and then they might choose to use them later on or not. But if they did, you would know who they were.
Exactly. I completely agree. Yeah, these were good books back then, I'll tell you.
Yeah, they were really good. But all right, well, let's wrap this up. We'll come back in a few minutes and tie a ribbon on this episode.
All right, sounds great, buddy.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of Oa.
Okay, Myron. Well, we got Dan Jurgens' interview, check. Green Lanterns, issues 53 and 54, check. Retro review, Tales of the Green Lantern Corps 1, 2, 3, check. News and notes. Got anything to add?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think this was a good episode.
Okay, great. So this will be aired. Let's see, we're recording this on we're Tuesday, right? So this will be up tomorrow, right?
Yep, I'm going to edit it tonight and publish it tomorrow so that it comes out the day that Green Lanterns 54 hits the stands on September 5th.
This the holidays got me off this week. I keep forgetting tomorrow's comic book day. So having that holiday off on Monday, we were off in our district, so it's kind of throwing my whole week for a loop.
I know what you mean. I mean, it feels like a Monday today.
Yeah.
But all right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us, and we hope you will be back to join us for our next episode. Until next time, this is Phil and Myron saying have a good one. Keep your power rings charged, treat each other well, and make every day your brightest day.
See you guys.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.